For more than 4,000 years, three shapes have sat on a plateau outside Cairo, and almost everyone who has ever stood beneath them has asked the same question in the wrong order. They ask who is buried inside. They should be asking what is buried underneath. The Giza Plateau is not a single monument. It is a complex of 10 pyramids, a scattering of temples, a network of stone causeways, and thousands of smaller tombs called mastabas, all arranged across a shelf of limestone so fine that ancient builders quarried directly from beneath their own feet. Three pyramids dominate the skyline: Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Of the three, Khafre's pyramid has always been the strangest, not because of what was found inside it, but because of what wasn't. When explorers finally reached the burial chamber deep inside Khafre's pyramid in the 19th century, they found a stone coffin with its lid already pushed aside. There was no mummy, no jewelry, no grave goods of any kind. And unlike almost every other tomb of that era, the walls carried no inscriptions, no prayers, no titles, no name of the king this monument was supposedly built to honor. There were no signs of forced entry either. No broken seals, no evidence that robbers had ever slipped through in the night to strip the room bare. The chamber looked exactly the way it had been left on the day it was sealed: empty. That single detail has haunted researchers for generations. A pyramid this size, requiring millions of tons of cut stone and decades of labor, built around a room that may never have held a body at all. If it wasn't a tomb, then the obvious next question is what all that effort was actually for, and where the real answer might be hiding. The first serious attempt to look underneath the pyramids with modern instruments came in 1968, when the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez brought a team to Giza armed with detectors built to track cosmic ray particles called muons. Muons rain down from the upper atmosphere constantly, and dense material like stone absorbs them at a measurable rate. By counting how many muons pass through the pyramid and where, Alvarez hoped to build something like an X-ray image of the interior, hunting for chambers that might be hiding behind solid rock. He found nothing. No unexplained voids, no hidden rooms, no signal at all beyond what a solid mass of limestone would produce. For decades afterward, that null result was treated as the final word. If Alvarez's equipment couldn't find anything, the thinking went, then there was probably nothing left to find. Giza, one of the most examined patches of ground on the planet, was assumed to have given up its last real secret sometime in the 1970s. But an instrument that detects nothing has only proven the limits of the instrument, not the limits of what's buried. Muon detectors in 1968 were bulky, imprecise, and only sensitive to voids fairly close to the surface. Anything deeper than a certain threshold would have been invisible to that generation of technology, no matter how large it was. The silence wasn't an answer. It was a gap waiting for better tools. Those tools would take almost 60 years to arrive. Part of the reason the mystery lingered so long has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with law. Egypt's antiquities authorities, for very good reason, forbid any kind of destructive excavation on the Giza Plateau. The site is too important, too fragile, and too easily damaged by careless digging, so permits for new exploratory work are rare and tightly controlled. That protection is not the villain of the story. It is what has kept the plateau intact for 2 centuries of study. But it also means that any new discovery about what lies beneath Giza cannot start with a shovel. It has to start with something that never touches the ground at all, an instrument capable of reading through solid stone from a distance, leaving the monument itself completely undisturbed. That is exactly what showed up in the spring of 2025. In March 2025, a small team of researchers held a press conference that would divide the world of Egyptology within 72 hours. The group included an Italian professor specializing in geophysical imaging, a radar engineer from a British university, and an independent explorer who had spent years investigating unexplained archaeological anomalies. Together, they claimed to have used a form of satellite-based radar called synthetic aperture radar to see straight through roughly half a mile of solid rock beneath the Pyramid of Khafre. Synthetic aperture radar itself is not fringe science. It's a decades-old, well-established method used by governments, oil companies, and geologists to map terrain, track ground movement, and locate resources buried far underground. What made this team's approach unusual was a technique layered on top of the radar, measuring tiny natural vibrations inside the rock, microseismic movement, and using shifts in the returning signal to build a three-dimensional picture of what lay beneath the surface, the way sonar builds a picture of an ocean floor, except this ocean was solid stone. According to the team, they didn't rely on a single satellite. 4 separate systems, run by different agencies and companies, all returned strikingly similar results in the same locations, without being told in advance what to look for. One satellite picking up something odd could be written off as noise. 4 independent systems converging on the same shapes is a much harder thing to dismiss. And what they described finding was almost impossible to categorize. 8 vertical shafts, cylindrical and evenly spaced, descending nearly 2,000 feet into the rock, far deeper than anything previously mapped beneath the plateau. 2 enormous cube-shaped chambers, each roughly 80 meters across, large enough to swallow a modern sports stadium. And wrapped around each of the 8 shafts, a spiral pathway winding downward as it descended, a shape that geology alone does not produce. Natural limestone caverns, called karst formations, are common in this part of Egypt, carved out slowly by water-dissolving stone over millions of years. But karst caves wander. They branch unpredictably, following weaknesses in the rock, never settling into matching, evenly spaced columns arranged directly beneath a man-made monument. A spiral, in particular, is not something erosion produces by accident. A spiral requires a plan. When one of the researchers, the radar engineer, was later asked in an interview what he believed the structure was actually for, he didn't reach for the word tomb. He described the network as connected to something he called information, and suggested that generating and storing energy was itself a form of information processing, language that sounded less like an archaeologist describing a burial site and more like an engineer describing a machine. He went further, calling the pyramids visible above ground the tip of the iceberg, a lid placed over something far larger sitting beneath it. It's worth pausing here on old religious texts. Ancient Egyptian funerary writings describe the soul of a dead pharaoh descending through gates and darkness on its way to the afterlife, a passage always treated as symbolic poetry, never as a literal description of physical space. If the radar findings are accurate, that old symbolism starts to look less like metaphor and more like a folk memory of something that genuinely existed beneath the sand. None of this was published in a peer-reviewed journal before the announcement. It went straight to a press conference and a public video, a sequence that has occasionally preceded real breakthroughs in the history of science, and just as often preceded public embarrassments that ended careers. The response came fast. Within 3 days, Egypt's most prominent former antiquities official, a man who has overseen excavation permits and access to the Giza plateau for decades, publicly declared the entire claim fake. He said the team never had authorization to study the area around Khafre's pyramid. He argued the radar method the team used had never been properly validated for imaging at that depth, and that the level of detail they claimed to see simply could not be extracted from that kind of signal, no matter how advanced the satellites were. He used blunt, dismissive language, leaving no ambiguity about where he stood. Some of that criticism holds up on its own merits. There is still no peer-reviewed paper backing the claim months after the announcement. Radar imaging genuinely does lose reliability and resolution the deeper it has to penetrate through dense rock. And the lead researcher on the project has a public history tied to other speculative and fringe topics that predates this discovery, which reasonably invites skepticism. But there's an uncomfortable structural detail sitting underneath all of that. Real peer review takes months, often years, involving independent labs reanalyzing raw data before anyone reaches a public verdict. This rejection took 3 days. And the person delivering it is also one of the very few individuals on Earth with the actual authority to grant or deny the access that could settle the question permanently, one way or the other. That access has never been granted. Not before the claim, not after it. None of this proves the buried structure is real. It doesn't prove the rejection was political rather than scientific either. But it does raise a fair question. When the person judging a claim also controls every door that could verify or disprove it, how separate can that judgment really be from that power? Access to Egypt's ancient sites has been shaped by politics, funding, and institutional gatekeeping for well over a century. That tension predates this particular controversy by generations, and it will likely outlast it too. Strip away the disputed cube chambers and the 8 spiral shafts entirely, and there is still a decade of quiet, peer-reviewed, undisputed science showing that Giza has never stopped hiding things. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used muon tomography, the same underlying principle Alvarez tried in 1968, dramatically refined, to scan the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It found a genuine, previously unknown void sitting directly above the Grand Gallery. The result was published in the journal Nature, and, after early pushback that mirrored the resistance every new claim in this field seems to trigger, it was eventually accepted, without serious dispute. In 2023, the same scanning approach confirmed a roughly 30-foot corridor hidden behind Khufu's north face, sitting unnoticed for thousands of years. In 2024, a team scanning near Giza's western cemetery detected an L-shaped anomaly just a few feet underground, with the lead researcher stating plainly that a shape that geometrically clean does not occur in nature on its own. In 2025, a joint German-Egyptian survey confirmed 2 previously unknown air-filled voids behind the polished granite casing of Menkaur's pyramid, the smallest of the 3. None of that is speculation. It's documented, published, and accepted by the field. It establishes, beyond argument, that the plateau has kept producing hidden spaces every time someone points a better instrument at it. There's one more detail worth sitting with. Stone itself cannot be directly dated. Every age ever assigned to these pyramids comes from organic material, charcoal, wood, human remains, found near the stone, not from the stone itself. The 4,500-year timeline the world has settled on is, at its foundation, an extremely well-supported estimate dressed up in the language of certainty rather than a measurement carved into the rock. Lay the confirmed discoveries next to the disputed ones, and a pattern starts to take shape. Voids above hidden chambers, corridors sealed behind solid faces, geometric anomalies that shouldn't exist naturally, uncovered again and again by completely different teams using completely different instruments across more than a decade. That pattern doesn't prove the Pyramid of Khafre sits on top of a 2,000-foot machine. It does prove that dismissing every new claim about Giza's underground as impossible has already been wrong multiple times in living memory. Whatever sits beneath that pyramid, natural cavern, ancient engineering project, or something science hasn't fully named yet, it hasn't moved. It can't. It's still down there, sealed under half a mile of stone and a law built to protect it, waiting on the one thing that has always decided what Giza is allowed to reveal: permission. And so far, nobody with the power to grant it has been willing to.